Welcome aboard, everybody. It's Captain D. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to run a couple of tests and show you guys the difference between running OpenGL and running the new 1150 Beta 1 Vulkan Metal graphics API with my system. In my system, I'm running a GTX 1080 video card and a i8700K processor. I have the settings pretty much maxed out here for the graphics. The only thing I don't max out here is the reflection detail, because that just kills my video card. The texture quality is set just to the maximum because in Vulkan there is not an option for maximum with no compression. What we're going to do as our test, we're just going to take off runway 31 at LaGuardia and fly out to the New York skyline. We're ignoring all ATC or stuff, this is just a test, and fly around some of this dense building areas. And show you what the differences are. Alright, so we departed. I'm just going to stay pretty low. Frames right now, we're hovering around 2930, which is about average for what I get in most places in low visual demand aircraft. And I cleared out all the weather. There's no weather or anything else to be a factor. If weather is a factor, weather can sometimes kill the frame rates. I will do a demonstration of such. But I like to stay at least 30 frames. That's what I shoot for. Higher, that's even better, but 30 frames is kind of my minimum. Things kind of start to choke a little bit even before you drop below 20 and get throttled by Xplane. But 30 and above, things are relatively smooth, at least for me. Now, this is all my opinion. I'm not a professional when it comes to explaining the differences between OpenGL and Vulkan. This is just a video to show, hey, this is what I got on my system and it's better. See, right there was a pause that we got, and it dropped to like 12 frames while it's pulling some kind of scenery texture. But yeah, we're hovering 25, 27. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fly out over the water, turn around, come back the other way, and we'll watch the frames here. Alright, so I mean, not too bad with the default stuff, and like I said, this is just the default scenery. I think I might have some ortho HD mesh for the whole United States that might do something, and I'm using the HD airport environments. That's the only add-on scenery that I have here. So what we're going to do is we're going to land here on this runway in front of me. And then I'm going to load up in some Orbix scenery and some of the Orbix True Earth stuff and see what the settings are like. And then we'll compare the two. Alright, I need to slow down here. Still running 25, 26 frames. But even if you tack on traffic and VATSIM and stuff, I don't think it would stay at 26. I think I'd be closer to 23 or 25, 20. After extensive review of the video footage, I've determined that our average frames per second on this particular portion of the flight is 25 frames per second. Alright, on the ground, safe and sound. Now we'll load up at a different airport with some Orbix scenery. Alright guys, so we're sitting on the runway 28 left to San Francisco. Engine started, frames are hovering around 20, 24, but I'm getting the occasional drop into the teens. We're going to take off and see how it handles in the air. When I first started this flight, I noticed that the frames were in the low to mid 20s, but as things progressed and I'm guessing things finished loading, the numbers increased a little bit. Alright, so off the runway, it went from the high 20s to now we're in the low 30s. We're going to do a 360 here. That's a lot of times that's how it'll hang up. And I'll get those pauses. Yeah, it dropped. See, it dropped down to the low 20s. And there we got a little pause. So doing a 360, I get a little pause and it drops down to the low 20s, but off the runway at less than 1,000 feet, it's at 34. And that's, yeah, and this is mostly over water, so let me turn here and go over some of the city and see how it changes.
Yeah, those water effects, they can really...
But I'm getting that occasional like split second pause when it's like trying to grab a texture or something.
Okay.
And again, this is with no weather. Alright, over the city, we're still in the 30s. I mean, and I'm not saying that with the default OpenGL stuff that I ever really had a problem. I just had the occasional pausing and in some spots some lower than desirable frame rates. But overall, it ran smoothly. It was nothing to really complain about. Some people are going to see bigger gains and better performance out of Vulkan than you'll see in this video. So please don't base any decision off of this video. This video is just a demonstration to show you the difference that I see in my system. And as we completed that 180, you'll see the frames dropped into the teens and we get some pausing. Vulkan is supposed to fix all that. So let's go ahead and land here back on the opposite runway in San Francisco. And we'll load up Vulkan and do the same flights. Alright, so stand by for the Vulkan video. Or Vulkan portion of the video. Alright, welcome back everybody. It's Captain D. Now we are in Xplane 1150 using Vulkan. All of our settings are going to be turned up to the maximum here, and we'll see what kind of differences we get. I'm going to leave the reflection detail off just because that's what I did with all the other testing as well. Okay, so on the ground, just the engine's running. We're running at right about 30 frames, 29 to 30. Alright, we're going to do the same thing we did last time. We're going to depart runway 31, fly around the skyline, and land at Newark. Another difference is I have this copy of Xplane on a mechanical drive and not an SSD, so the loading times are a little longer. There's the skyline. Now, what I'm noticing here is it looks a little like some of the textures didn't load right. As I got closer to the buildings, they all seemed to fill in, but for that split second further away, it kind of made them look a little transparent. Up in the air, that's about 30 frames. Outside view, we were getting about 40. Some of the buildings look almost transparent up here, though. I don't know if that's the glare on the window or something like that here. $29, $28. But this is with everything turned up, and it's a lot smoother. Like if we do a 360 here, I spoke a little too soon here. As you can see, we're getting some stuttering, and as you'll see, it's a result of the anti-aliasing setting. I did notice a tiny bit of shuddering. So here's what we're going to do here. We're going to take a look here. A lot of people have said anti-aliasing eats up some frames, so we're going to move that down to 4. Oh yeah, and that gave us like 50, almost 15, 16 frames. Higher in places. But then again, we have the little bit of shimmering through I think that's just through the prop, though. Because if I look out past the prop, I don't see it. Upon further review, you can tell that there is some shimmering, probably from dropping down the anti-alias settings, but the frame rates are higher, and I no longer have that jerkiness. So it's a trade-off. $45 to $50 is kind of the range we're hovering in, which is great. So not a huge difference for me as far as frame rates go on this flight. We do gain a couple of frames. I've heard in a couple of places that NVIDIA users would see about a 20% increase, and that's about what I'm seeing here. But things are smoother. Like you can do a 360, you can do the pattern work, and I don't get the pausing that momentarily happens. I mean, it's just a split second pause, but it's enough for you to notice. So, in my opinion, so far, Vulkan is better for my system. Now, I haven't tested every single plane, and I haven't tested every single add-on yet. This is just a beta. So, who knows, may run into some problems during the beta phase. However, eventually that'll all get worked out. Everybody has to catch up. It's what happens when something new comes out. I think things look a little crisper. I guess is the word you'd use. I mean, visually it's not a whole lot different. It's the same textures, it's just a different graphics API. Alright, there's Newark's runway. And then we'll go to San Francisco. And do the Orbix test. I do see slightly more shimmering because we turned down that anti-aliasing though, so that's maybe a factor. Alright, on the ground safe and sound, and we'll reload at San Francisco.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case.
Alright guys, we're back. We're on the ground here at San Francisco International. This is the outside. We're getting about 60 frames with the same settings in Vulkan here, which seems to be, at first glance, higher frame rates in Orbix scenery than we were seeing in the default Xplane. So what I'm going to do is turn the anti-aliasing back up like we had in the first part of the last video, and we're still at about 60 frames. Inside the airplane, with nothing running cold and dark, we dropped down to about 32. Alright, so we're going to take off here and just fly around, kind of do a big circuit here.
It's like the Seattle demo area and the Innsbruck, like Bowie demo area.
And I'm not using any other type of like video card frame rate limiter or anything like that. I've got the NVIDIA frame rate thing turned off. I'm using one 55-inch 1080p display.
And apparently Lowy, there's a Lowy directory in the Toronto scene, just with some parked cars and stuff. But if I go to that directory,
Turn a left crosswind here.
it's almost like but nothing else is having an issue.
And everything's hovering around 40. Now if we do what we did last time and go up here and put the anti-aliasing back down to 4
Like I can see
and reload, and we gain about
small about something else.
5 or 6 frames. Now we're at about, well, it's actually jumping up even higher to almost 60. But again, when you do these steep turns, you don't get the pausing that I got before. I also noticed with the anti-aliasing turned down, there is a little bit less shimmering in the Orbix scenery than I saw in the default Xplane scenery. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. So with this test and this specific scenario, the Orbix scenery does better than the default. It seems to me that the graphics API does a whole lot better job working with the Orbix textures than some of the default scenery ones, and that could be because of the higher quality texture or some other things that Orbix does. Now that could be because there's not as many big buildings or whatever like the New York skyline. But we're still averaging at about 40. And that's with the anti-aliasing up all the way. And back at 4. So if we go here and we turn it back up, it's really only about a 4-5 frame difference at times. But not. And no pausing with rapid turns or anything like that.
So on one of those,
Coming into the airport, we kind of drop into the low 30s, but no stuttering or pausing.
are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know, I wasn't hearing anything.
Nice landing. So with everything turned up, I would say we average between 35 and 40 frames.
I did the French.
So a couple of differences that I've noticed when it comes to the difference between Vulkan and OpenGL. The reflections here on the window are a lot more prominent with Vulkan than they are with OpenGL.
Okay, so it's somehow gone. It's not in my recycle bin. Okay.
The load time at the first time you start it up is definitely takes longer, but after that it's pretty much normal. Mine takes a little bit longer because, like I said earlier, my standard copy of Xplane is on an SSD drive. This testing copy of the beta is on a mechanical drive. Okay, so this graph shows the difference that I experienced on average between Vulkan and OpenGL, both in default and Orbix True Earth scenery. Now this wasn't a constant. This is an average. At times I saw better performance as well as lower performance, but it wasn't long enough to affect the overall average of the flight. Now we did some playing around with the anti-alias scenery settings and found that in the Orbix it had less of an impact on the frame rates than in the default, and that also is not factored into this chart. Another quick note is I noticed throughout the changing of the settings that the Xplane 11.50 Vulkan loads less textures onto the video card at one time than the OpenGL. So in a way it's less taxing on your video card. I hope you all enjoyed this video. So that concludes my little impromptu test between the differences in Vulkan and OpenGL in terms of frame rates on my system. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe, and I welcome your comments below. Until next time, see you later.